So Dr. Annette Rahal is a family business advisor. Annette has built on her years of personal experience in a family business by pursuing more structured training in the United States, where this has been recognized as an area in need of special expertise. She is uniquely equipped to advise families in business rather, on strategies and structures to ensure that their business is meeting the professional standards required to compete successfully. She helps family businesses and the challenges peculiar to family companies, such as smooth transitions from one generation to the next. She brings to the table a profound understanding of the commercial realities faced by businesses of all sizes in the Caribbean. Prior to founding her practice in 2004 rather, Annette Rahael held a senior position in her family's Trinidad-based business for 18 years. She lived through resolving issues that affect family businesses while being responsible for key functions in a rapidly growing company. Annette obtained her doctorate from George Washington University, and her doctoral dissertation in Co-CEOs in Family Business was awarded the International Best Dissertation Prize in 2012 by the Family Firm Institute. Annette is a fellow of the Institute and carries the designation ACFBA, Advanced Certificate in Family Business Advising. She is the first person in the Caribbean to have achieved that status, so we are honored to have her with us today. And she has recently been awarded a research grant from the Family-Owned Business Institute to conduct further research on co-CEOs in family business, and her poster presentation on that research has won a prize at the 2015 Family Enterprise Research Conference.
Well, thank you for having me, and I know now you know a little bit about me, and I have been told that the people who are tuning in today, whether remotely or live, fall into one of two categories. Either you're founders of family businesses, or you have already made a transition into the next generation. And a lot of what I say today, you may say to yourself, boy, I wish I'd heard that 10 years ago. Or you may say, I will not need to use any of this for another 10 years. It's very usual for me to get both kinds of reactions. Family business management, as a subset of business management, is a very reasonably new discipline, 40 years or so old. And I know some of you listening may think, I'm not even sure I'm a family business. You probably started a business because you had a good idea and a need to make money, but in the back of your head, there was not a thought of, I'm going to build a big business that I can pass on to the next generation and leave a legacy of a business. You just needed to get something going and you did it. So congratulations on getting as far as you've gotten. And now, while you may be unsure to characterize yourself as a family business, you're really not alone. It is a problem that has confounded academics for years. In a one 10-year period, there were 44 definitions of a family business. I particularly like this one that talks about a family business being a business considered a family business to the extent that its owners and management are concentrated within a family unit. So if the business, either ownership and or management, is within a family unit, and the aim is to maintain or increase the connection between the family and the business. Now, this is not an easy undertaking. As the first speaker spoke about the dynamics of matching or marrying family with a business, because there are different characteristics of each system. In a family, you concentrate on emotion. How are you feeling today? How are things with you? In the business, yes, we ask our employees how they are, but really we want to focus on facts. What were yesterday's sales, what's going on in the market, and so on. In a family, by nature of your birth, you have unconditional acceptance. You know, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. Every parent accepts their children as they are, by and large, right? In a business, rarely we accept you based on your performance. You do not perform, you're out. In a family, you're there for life. In a family, the authority is generational. So we respect grandparents, we respect elder aunts and uncles, and so on. In a business, you do not get your authority by virtue of your position in a family. You get it by virtue of your role. So I advise family businesses where perhaps there are 4 siblings, and the youngest one is the CEO. So it is the role that gives you the authority, not your position in the family. In a family, you're very inward oriented. You care what's happening within your family. I have two sisters. This is a good example. Two sisters who, one of them allows her kids to play mass from the time they're 14 years old, right? The other one has a strict rule. You have to finish CXC first. So the cousins talk to each other, and one cousin goes to the mother, and how can you not let us play? Auntie Helen lets her kids play. And my sister says, well, that's her family. In our family, this is how we do things. So it's all very much close in on the values and the norms within your family. In a business, you better be outwardly oriented. You better be scanning the world environment, the local environment, what's going on with oil and gas, what's going on with the US dollar. You constantly, in order for your family to progress those things, you need to be looking at externally from your business. In a family, you're about developing self-esteem. This is what parents are taught, I think sometimes in excess, but to teach their children and to get their children to develop this self-esteem, to feel good about themselves, feel they can accomplish anything. In a business, while it's nice to think that our employees were developing their self-esteem and we need them to perform and so on, the reality is we really want them to develop skills to support the business one way or the other. In a family, we nurture people. Now, all of you have heard, well, in business, people are the most important thing and so on. Yes, but really, in a business, you care about profits. To the extent that the people support you, right, in the business making profits, because that is what keeps them employed, you also are caring about your people, but you cannot have one without the other. Okay, so you now have these two different systems here. It's complicated further, right, by adding what we call the ownership circle. So in the 1980s, a very smart Harvard researchers came up with this very simple diagram that really segments family businesses into 7 segments. Let's do this clockwise. Number 3, people in segment number 3 are owners who are not family members and who do not work in the business. So very often, when you start a business, you may not have all the desired capital. So you may team up with someone who may be a silent shareholder or investor, and they have 10% of the shares, or some distant relative, whatever. The person is there just as an investor. Now, when businesses first started in Trinidad after World War II, when family businesses really got going, there were a lot of businesses that had this kind of blended ownership. What has happened in my experience over the decades is that the majority shareholder often buys out the minorities, right? But there may be businesses among you where you still have that situation. I mean, I have a client right now where 2 separate families own the business, 2 distinct total families into 2nd and 3rd generation. Then number 6 are owners who work in the business but are not members of the owning family, the majority family. Number 2 are people who work in the business who are not family or owners. These are your employees, your management team. Number 5 are family members who work in the business who are not yet owners. And I say yet because this often encompasses the next generation, whom I call potential shareholders, right? You may also have family members who work in the business who are never going to be owners. This could be what we call in Trinidad pumpkin vine families members. The boss's wife, sister-in-law, nephew. Convoluted. Yeah, difficult to handle, I'll tell you. Number 1, family members who are not owners and who do not work in the business. These are very often it's the dreaded outlaws, the in-laws that a lot of family business owners like to consider as the problem in family business. My kids get along great together. It's when they get married and these new people come in that we have the problem. So these people have their own characteristics and their own concerns. Number 4, family members who are owners who do not work in the business. This usually will occur when the business has had maybe 1 or 2 transitions already from generation to generation, and somebody went off and studied medicine or law and is not involved in the business. but they own some shares in the business. And of course, they have their own concerns, you know. We don't get dividends, but my brother is driving a new car every 3 years. My brother works in the business. What's happening there? So each of these segments has their own particular concerns, strengths, and contributions they can make. The fact that you do not work in a business does not mean that you cannot make a viable contribution. You can be a scout on the outside. You can be doing different things to contribute to the success of the business. Now, the difficulty here is for the people in segment number 7. And I am going to assume that is a majority of the participating businesses today. People who are family members, owners, and who work in the business. So they have the fun job of managing all the other 6 segments. And this is where the difficulties sometimes can arise in family business. Because you want to focus on growing the business, and yet there is family issues which you cannot ignore. And I want to say at the outset that I'm a family business advisor. One hand cannot clap. I believe in family harmony and growth of business. So we have to find a way to combine all these systems, right, and put enough stopgaps in place that they don't spill over into each other excessively and cause problems. So family business governance is about 2 things really. It is about building bridges between the family and the business, and it is about setting boundaries between the family and the business. So you are about combining these 2 systems. And to do this, there are special governance structures, okay? Some of which you're familiar with. In the ownership circle, you have a board of directors, a shareholders assembly. In the business circle, you have a management team. What some of you may not be aware of is that within the family circle, there also are structures that support the governance of a family business. There are 2, a family forum and a family council. Now, when you look at this, okay, each circle and each one of these different structures are responsible for creating a plan, a document that will help govern the business. So in the family circle, the family charter. In the ownership circle, shareholder agreements. The owners and the family get together and decide about a will, what happens to the shares. The owners, the family, and to some extent, the people who work in the business decide on the strategic plan. The people who work in the business are responsible for implementing the operational plan. Now, these different plans, these different structures come into being at different stages. And every one of these circles has what we call stages of development. Let's take a family. You start off with a husband, wife, children, and then at some stage, maybe the children join the business. So you move from a founding owner, and then there may be more than one child in the business. So we move to what we call a sibling partnership, who may own the business. And then we go down, fortunate enough to go down to the next generation, and they continue working the business together. We have what we call a cousin consortium. Now, you cannot stop the progression of a family. That's chronological time, okay? In the ownership phase, you may start off as a founding owner, 100% of the shares are held by maybe one person or the couple, and then you may pass it on to the kids. So you may have sibling ownership, and then they may pass it on to their children. So you have different branches owning the business, so you have a cousin consortium. However, this is one progression that does not have to be linear. It can move backwards. If you have 2 or 3 branches owning a business, 2 of them may decide to sell off to one. So you go from having cousins owning it back to siblings only. Or even sometimes when you have siblings owning a business together, they may all decide to sell out to one person. So you go back to having a single founder. So it is a fluid dynamic with regard to ownership of the business. Right? Now, within the actual business itself, there are also stages. There's startup, there's growth, there's maturity. And in family businesses, and I'm not really sure, the fact is that some of you have gone into second generation, so I'm assuming you've been around for a while. You start off with the superhero, the man in charge of everything, doing it all himself or herself. And then they say, boy, this is too much, so they go and get a bunch of helpers, you know. A lot of staff, but it still remains a pyramid structure. Everything comes up to the boss to make a decision. from what kind of furniture polish to use to what to invest in. And finally, as the business progresses and grows, you have no choice but to develop a team to help you manage your business. However, you bring in senior people, whoever you employ, whatever departments you put in. And of course, people like to think of this as, oh, well, we're professionalizing the business. I know it's a popular term, but the reality is the business could be professional from the word go in terms of how it functions, not necessarily by hiring professionals. Not that I have anything against professional, I'm a professional myself, but you know, there is this kind of misconception about what it takes to grow a family business to the extent that it can function in a way that combines family issues and keeps the business moving forward. Now, when you get to this stage where you have a business that has grown, you may or may not have next generation members involved, it is always advisable to have some kind of what I call clean ears and fresh eyes. And this is why one of the things I really, really advocate for is that you have a board of directors. Now, before you get involved in what would that take and the expense of setting up a board, and I don't have all the required systems to put board in place, there are two kinds of boards, right? There's an advisory board and one that's legally constituted. In the advisory board, the names are not on the letterhead and they're not legally liable, right, for what happens in your company. If it's a legally constituted board, they are registered in the company's registry and they are legally liable. And sometimes with a small business, they have difficulty getting people to come and serve on a legally constituted board because people are concerned about the legal liability. And often I tell people, just come on as an advisor for the first year or two, be part of an advisory board. And then if you're comfortable, we could, go on to make you legally constituted. So it really is not necessary that you have this legally constituted board in order to get the kind of advice that a good board will give you. Both boards perform oversight, financial oversight, strategic oversight. Both boards could have members who are paid or not, and both sides will get frustrated if their advice is not heeded. Now, this is always a hard sell for founders because it is, I don't want anybody in here coming to talk to me about my business. They don't know anything. I know everything about my business. I could teach them how to run my business. Or alternatively, I don't want people coming in here and stealing my ideas. Or alternatively, I don't share information like that. The thing about family businesses is that we are not really this closely held. We're hermetically sealed. Nothing goes in and nothing comes out. So we keep our cards very close to our chest. The people who have instituted boards in family businesses, we see a natural progression. This is how it usually starts. The board is usually a rubber stamp to start with, because if you are a limited liability company, you have to have two directors. And sometimes it's the husband and wife, and he comes home and says, here, sign this. Gives it to the wife to sign, and or the accountant prepares board papers, and that's that, right? A legal requirement. Then people, as the business grows, says, I need to have input. So they go bring the people, senior people who work in the business, and they create this, well, really I call it an executive team, but they may call it a board. The accountant or the HR professional, whoever is working in the business. And then they say, we're growing and we need external voices. So they go bring maybe the lawyer or the auditor who works for the company. They're not there full time, but they're advisors, but paid advisors to the company, right? And finally, the highest level of sophistication is when you can get to the fact where you have independent directors. Directors who do not work for the company, are not paid by the company, right? They're just people with good business knowledge or whatever it is you need on your board. You may want to have someone who is well connected in a particular sector. Maybe you want somebody with good government contacts because you want to try and figure out how to negotiate getting contracts in government. So you bring somebody in who's worked in that field and they're there on your board to help you grow it in that direction. So this is basically how, in terms of the business side, how we implement governance in terms of boards of directors and family businesses. And you may have some of this actually happening informally, in that you may have advisors you speak to, friends you speak to, and it has not been formalized. I urge you though to formalize it. The reason is that sometimes, and I've had this experience, a business owner will speak to one friend or one confidant, get some advice, speak to another friend, and get sometimes similar, sometimes conflicting advice. But it's very good for everybody to hear the same thing at the same time. Also, in family business boards, they perform a lot of other functions. You know, they hold you accountable, which the star boys, the founders in family business don't often like that. They don't want to be held accountable because they want to get up and change their mind tomorrow morning about the direction they're taking, or they don't want to set a target because they're nervous they fall short of it or whatever, or they want to set too ambitious a target and they don't want anybody to tell them, hold on, put your foot on the brake here, this isn't going to work. So it's one of the hurdles I think in family business governance is getting family business owners to recognize the value of a good board. Now, we talked about the board, we talked about a management team. In the family, I said there were two structures, a family forum and a family council. A family forum is the wider family who are members of the owning family, whether they're current owners or not. And yes, this includes the in-laws, this includes the wives, this includes the husbands. In some cases, we include children above, one family did it above 16, another one may do it above 18. And it really is the family getting together once or twice a year just to talk about their business. It's a very focused discussion. You don't have to share numbers if you don't want to, but to talk about the direction of the business. The idea is that people feel included, even though they're not working there, even though they don't have an ownership stake in it, they're still part of the family. And people consider them part of the business by virtue of their last names, frankly. The family council is a subset of the family forum. Think of it as the board of directors for the family. Okay? And their job initially is to produce what we call a family charter. Now, again, I am going to list about 50 or 60 different policies, some of which may be applicable to you right now, some of which may not be applicable for years to come, right? And I'm hoping Export TT shares these slides. I've given them permission to do so with all the participants, so you can hold on to this if you want to ever refer back to it. But here's basically an example of what are the kinds of things that you do write in a family charter. Let me say the offset that some of what I'm talking about will be put into a legal shareholders agreement, but this is really a moral type of agreement among shareholders, among family members. So a family, like everybody else, should have a mission and values. What do we stand for as a family? This one is something I really urge you to get started on now. As I said, you may have, when you started your business, you didn't think of it as lasting for generations. And now you're in a position to say, hey, I do want this thing to continue. It's a good idea to begin collecting the archives. In other words, where were our first premises? Do we have pictures? Who were our first employees? You're building a history of the family business. Because if your family business endures 50 years, 100 years from now, you're not going to be around, and there's nobody to tell the story of how this came to be. And I think it's critical that you have things like this so you can share it with future generations, with future employees, so they understand where the business has transitioned out of and what they're covered into today. If you go to Peak's new building, well, I don't know how new it is now, but Peak's in El Socorro, they have a wall in their lobby. And they have like 1900 to 1930, and they talk about the major achievements, 1930 to 1960. So you can follow the history along a wall. Often family businesses often may have a room, if they're a very big business, especially in North America and Europe, they actually have something called a legacy room where you can go in and see videos and so on. When I was doing some follow-up research on my thesis about co-CEOs, I visited a few family businesses run by co-CEOs. That's like maybe two brothers. In one case, it was a brother and sister running the business together as CEOs, co-CEOs. They were able to hand me things like, here's a book. We're 100 years old last year. This is what we produced. And pictures of everything. So it speaks to the continuity. It speaks to where you've been. So if one thing you do when you leave here today is you go and you pull these documents, make sure you have them, scan them, keep them digitally safe. I have had the experience of losing stuff in a fire that would have been valuable to a family. Then, of course, of the family charter, we talk about investment guidance, how much risk we want to take, What is the code of communication among us? How do we talk? Do we say that every CEO with a family member sends out an email, everybody must answer within 72 hours? I actually had a live example of this where he was frustrated as heck. He said, I would send out emails and it's like nobody would answer, but they want to have an input. So we, write down what are our expectations? What are our expectations with regard to conduct? Do we recognize that it is not a good idea to be standing in the hallway and screaming at each other or disagreeing about something that may have some family relatedness more than business relatedness in front of the staff? What message does that send? What and how do we decide on our governance mechanisms? Do we really want a board? How do we choose the members of the board? Do we want a family council? Who will sit on it? How often we rotate them? Do we really want to have family forums? Who will attend? At what age? And so on. So these are some of the things that the subset of the family group should sit together and begin to talk about and document. And people do their different stages, and they do, as I said, different procedures as it comes along. Of course, the ideal is to do this early, but the ideal very often does not obtain. Then, of course, family employment. What are the qualifications? How do we compensate family members? How do we appraise them? Do we allow, if they want to leave, do we allow them to come back? You want to guard against a revolving door. What's the age of retirement for family members? Because you may have an age of retirement in your business, but it very seldom will ever apply to the founder. I mean, when I ask a founder, well, when do you plan to retire or whatever? Well, they say, well, God is the HR director. When God takes them home, that's when they retire. It's till death do us part kind of thing. The role of in-laws, will they be allowed to work in the business? Will they not? What input will they have? What about a conflict of interest? What about if you're working in the family business and you have a side hustle? How does that work out? And what about if your side hustle is selling stuff to the family business? How do we mentor our next generation? What kind of advice we give them? Do we want this business? A lot of the grandparents I deal with say, I really established this business. I want to make sure my grandchildren are educated. How can we create a fund within the business to ensure that? What about if we have a family member who wants to start their own business? They don't want to join the existing business for whatever reason. Maybe they don't like it, the nature of the business. Maybe they don't want to work with uncles, aunts, and cousins, but they have a good idea. But they need input, whether it is money, whether it is advice. How do we, or do we at all, consider having joint venture with family members? So as we're growing the family businesses, becomes plural in this case, but it may not all have the same ownership. What's our public profile, our lifestyle issues, what do we want to do in terms of philanthropy? And of course, here comes the critical ones that really should go into a legal agreement. First of all, what's your dividend policy? And that varies. Some people just say a one-liner. It is decided by the board, recommended by the CEO and decided by the board. And money, while it makes the world go round, it does cause a lot of issues in a family business and everywhere else, actually, all families. How do we protect our shares? And let me give you a bulletin. We do not have prenuptial agreements in Trinidad and Tobago. All these family business owners who come to me and want to do a prenuptial arrangement because their adult son or adult daughter is getting married, and of course, even if they approve of the spouse, which is very rare. I mean, I did have a man with 6 kids say to me once, and they were all married. If I had to choose a spouse of any of these children, I was choosing none of the 6 that they come here with. But that is, I'm afraid, not in his hands. So they're always about how do we protect our shares, against divorce. So the lawyers jump through a lot of hoops and put all kinds of things in shareholder agreements about unanimous approval of all the other shareholders before new shareholders introduced and so on. It's one of the ticklish things. It's their loan policy, especially for directors and for shareholders. Causes a lot of trouble, actually, because some people running the business may begin to use the business as a personal cash register. And for the purposes of accounting, they call it a loan, but is it really a loan? There's no interest being charged. There's no repayment terms. Is it just siphoning money out of the business but without declaring that you are taking it as a dividend. Buy-sell agreements. Look, I believe in ties that bind you together but not bound you together. People must have the capacity, if they own shares in a business, to sell it whenever they see fit for whatever reason. I don't know, maybe they want to go and surf in Australia. Maybe they need the money. They have a child to attend to that has special needs and needs a lot of money. And this is where some of their wealth is tied up. And the best time to work on a buy sell is long before you actually need it. So, because at the point when somebody says, well, you know what, buy me out, or I want to sell, emotions are beginning to run high sometimes, and then when you sit then to discuss how are we going to value it, how are we going to pay you, is it all in one shot, is it over time, will we allow you to sell all at once or sell some at a time? It's too raw at that point. So buy-sell agreements is something you think about long before it's ever going to happen. And you legally make that binding. And of course, estate planning for the will, very critical. And of course, the senior generation never like when I say to them, listen, I suggest you not only make a will, but that you have a public reading of the will while you're alive. I said, because you get an opportunity to explain to everybody what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. Otherwise they're going to come and spit on your grave. Not for some people, they really don't care. So when they're not around, well, that's so be it. And of course, do you want a family office? Do you want to somehow let the business support family in other areas outside of actually the business? Now, the big thing here was the family member employment. I suspect that is one of the things. I was going back to it, but I'll just keep going. One of the big things is family member employment, because you know what? It is really difficult, because it is very hard. You don't fire your son or your daughter. Very hard to. I should say you don't. Very difficult to. In fact, sometimes it's very difficult to even hold them accountable. But is it really nepotism if you're hiring family members? Or is it an attempt at keeping the familyness, of keeping the values of the family to be transmitted into the business? So there's an upside and a downside to hiring family members. First of all, it's easy to have tacit knowledge transferred. What do I mean by that? A lot of what business founders and business owners do is from years of experience. And if I ask them to write it on a piece of paper, why they're doing it, they have no idea. It is just something they do. It's almost like an instinct, but it really is knowledge that they have acquired over the years. And if you're a son or a daughter or a family member, it's easy to transfer that to you because you're spending more time with this person. You're seeing how they operate. You know how they think, and you understand how they come to these conclusions. So right now, I'm advising a family where the kids, I was like, okay, you attend every single meeting that your father is at. It's not in your area of the business. And they say yes. And they said, you know what? I want to understand how he comes to his conclusions. So they will attend the receivables meetings, they will attend the sales meetings, they're attending every single meeting, right? And it's not a bad idea, because afterwards now, for the transfer of tacit knowledge to really occur, somebody has to ask a question. So the junior, the successor may go up to the father and say, so why did you decide that? I sometimes coach them, you don't have to do it in the meeting. This is something you do after. I tell the successors, if you want to really run the business, you're going to carry the old man's briefcase for 10 years, walk around with him. So you get this tacit knowledge. In the upside, there's strong external relationships. If a founder has good relationships with the bankers, with customers, and so on, it is very easy for those relationships to be transferred to offspring. Hopefully, one of the values of hiring family members is you have lower turnover. Now, a lot of times you start off with family members coming in and they, because they're needed. There's no question of an option. But that's one of the upsides of hiring family members. Hopefully, cross fingers, they have a greater commitment to the business. This business is not only their current livelihood, it is what it will provide for their future generations. Their name is on the door, they have pride in it. Okay. The upside also is that they understand the nature of patient financial capital, in that they know they need to reinvest and reinvest and reinvest, right? Of course, there comes a time where you have to have a certain degree of harvesting. You cannot constantly be reinvested and not giving the owners or the potential owners some financial benefit from the business. And the upside of having family members working in the business is that you are very likely to have a good, successful succession, pass it on different positions. Here are some of the stumbling blocks. Very often, it could deter external people from coming to work with you. They think that there is a ceiling in this business. I could never be the chief accountant because they have children in that position or children in that department. So I can only rise so far, no further. That's a valid concern. And hopefully, the business grows enough that these people can get some of their own autonomy, these external hires, as I call them. But it's something you have to reassure your employees that yes, I do want. I may reserve some families say right off, I reserve these two or three spots for family members that I am grooming. Or alternatively, listen, it doesn't matter. I'm treating a family member exactly as if it were a non-family member in terms of skills that are required. So you have to find your own middle path of attracting these people, right, and maintaining the familyness. One of the downfalls is if you are a child of a family business owner, you could think that the business is there, you could go in at any time, it could perpetuate a sense of entitlement. The work ethic of family members could become an issue. Johnny didn't show up at work till 9:30, and Dad says, "Yeah, but I know he went out late last night, or he had a headache. I know the mother was seeing about him. He was vomiting all evening, whatever." The point of the matter is, you end up with family members who could not have the work ethic, especially of the founder. Well, first of all, they don't have the need for it. They don't have the eye of the tiger. When you start a family business and you are now getting things in place, you're now getting customers, you're now getting your product right, you're now begging the bank for more money. You have a driving need to work 24/7, folks, which family business owners will tell you they live, eat, and breathe the business. By the time we go to the next generation, they have to go to the gym every day, and Friday night they have to go out drinking, and they don't work on a Sunday and whatever, and weekends are for this and that and the other. So the work ethic is definitely changing. How do you get them to at least contribute what they need to? Supervisors, if you have a family member starting lower down in the business, which is a good place for them to start, and someone is supervising them, that person is very hamstrung. How do I correct a family member? This is the boss's son, the boss's nephew, the boss's grandson. The successor also may begin to think, hey, I am only here because I'm a member of the Lucky Sperm Club. I could have made this elsewhere, could have done well in another outside business. Salary negotiations get very tough with family members because we very often in family business confuse pay and compensation with love. So pay me more, it means you like me more, you love me more. You may have people not accepting the family business hires. All right. So these are some of the pros and cons, but I am not one to say, oh, no family members must ever darken this door. Right. I do think, however, that it's important that you do put down an employment policy to define certain things. So, for instance, what's the definition in the policy? What's the definition of family? Is it only direct descendants? Is it the in-laws? What is it? Is it the stepchildren? What is the family member? Do you say that you give preference to family members, or that we go to the market and the best person gets a job? Realistically, in family businesses, we are going to give some preference to family members. However, the recommendation would be that that person comes equipped with at least something that somebody else from the outside would have that the job requires. Well, are there entry requirements? Is there a flow? Do you have to at least finish high school before you walk in these doors? Or have an associate's degree, or have some kind of tertiary education? Are we able to allow family members to work part-time? Can they do consultancy? How do we pay them? What perks do they get? How do we appraise them? Everybody gets 2 weeks vacation. Do we say with family members, wink, wink, they take 10 days here, 2 days here, 4 days here. We don't pay attention because we anticipate that they're working 24/7. What are the reporting lines? Now, in small businesses, inevitably, the successor generation is reporting to a parent, okay, because it's not a very big business. You may not have layers of management. As much as possible, that is something that it really causes some trouble initially. So it's always good if they could report initially to an external person. And frankly, the next generation hates to hear me say this, but frankly, I always advise them to go work somewhere else before they come into the family business. So you understand the value of reporting lines, you understand the value of clocking in and out. How do we train them? What's the career path? How do all these things we need to consider and put it into our family employment policy? Now, the question then becomes, well, how do we assess if this person is really committed to the business? So there are different kinds of commitment. There is a person who feels obliged. It's an obligation. They ought to work in the business. And this is when we've gone past the fact of needing them. Because sometimes you start a business and you need to have a family member because you know what, you don't have to pay them a lot, but you need their labor, their hands to move this business forward. But it has grown and some people feel an obligation. Well, working on a family business is neither an obligation nor is it a birthright. It's an opportunity. So anybody who feels they ought to and comes in with this sense of obligation, unless they really want to, you can have some issues. What about the people who feel they have to? Because the way they look at it is, if I do not go in there and put my foot in that door, I am not going to benefit financially from this business. Even if he leaves me shares, I will not be in the business working it to be able to take what I want and get the car I want to drive and so on. So they say there's opportunity cost for not being in this business. Then the people who have no other alternatives, they cannot get a job selling doubles at the corner. Right? They have no alternatives when they come into the family business. Each one of these levels of commitment is hopefully what you move away from in time. What you really want is people who want to join the business, who have a desire to join the business. Now, desire is not enough. I desire to be a size 8. Well, you can't see me here, but I'm definitely not. I desire to be a size 8, but if I'm not prepared to go to the gym for 2 hours every day and eat salads for the rest of my life, I will never become a size 8. So my desire is not enough. Do I have the talent? Am I prepared to do the hard work? So when you are assessing the level of commitment, you want to get them to move. Now, sometimes some of them come in lacking alternatives, but in time they learn to love the business and want to do well. Sometimes the people even with the opportunity cost, although I always kind of look a little askance at them because if they're there just to protect their interests, right? I am not always convinced that they understand that it's all for one. In other words, my interest is the same as my brother's interest or my cousin's interest. So if I'm protected, I have to trust that they will do what is right for the company in the same way that I will do what is right for the company, even if it's right for me. And if it's right for me, it has to be right for them. Now, what is the point of all of this is in terms of all these procedures or thinking these things through is that you want to have what I consider a four-legged stool, right? This is my model for family businesses. I tell them, listen, you want to have a tactful business. You want to have transparency, accountability, communication, and trust. Okay? Transparency could lead to accountability. Good communication, we talk about it in a little while, is the basis for a lot of this. If you have the transparency, accountability, and communication, trust naturally follows. So the first thing to be transparent about, and the thing that we always keep under the rug, is how we share this money up in this business. So in a business, you get your money, salary, you get a salary, and you get a bonus. These two are tied to a job. They should be transparent and they should be universal in that if it is a position, accounts clerk or whatever, if Joe Bloke from the outside is in this position, that is what they get, this salary and this bonus. On the family side, the owner will get dividends, which he may then dispense as gifts. And that is, of course, his prerogative, and that is within the family domain. So parents, I'm dealing with parents right now who say, I'm going to leave more to this particular child because this child has some special needs, and frankly, I don't trust the sister to take care of her. All right, so even now, the gifts go more to one child than the other. The ones that can cause the problems are the middle one, what we call perks, because there's some perks that are attached to a job. Okay, these days everybody getting a cell phone as a perk of working in a company because people are using it all the time to conduct business. But do you need a car for your job? If I hire Joe Bloke, would I give him a car? This job doesn't require a car. However, you're family members, so I will give you a car, right? And then, well, is that a perk for working in the family business, or is that a perk for being a family member? And is this a perk we're going to apply evenly to people who work or do not work in the business? And then the question of keeping the salaries secretive. I encourage a CEO once to be transparent. He says, well, I don't know how much money my siblings make. I said, yes, that is true. But you don't have shares in whatever business they're working for. They have shares in the business that you're working for, and you're working on their behalf for. So the level of transparency, because what it does, it dispels suspicion, right? One of the hardest issues to deal with in a family business is the question of transparency around money. Now, I always ask people, do you know the 3 rules of real estate investing? And everybody knows it's location, location, location. Well, folks, today I'm going to give you the 3 rules of family business according to Rahael. Communication, communication, communication. Now, it's not an easy thing to achieve, right? Because we talk about open, honest communication, timely communication. Everybody hearing the same thing, also timely and timeliness. All kinds of issues impact communication. I teach an entire course on this actually, and this is my go-to resource for it. I teach an entire half day on difficult conversations, how to conduct difficult conversations. I recommend you buy this book. It was Harvard Insight team, the Harvard Negotiation Project. People wrote the book, and I was lucky enough to attend the seminar that they themselves gave. One of the authors actually gave the seminar. But it is a great way of acquainting you with mechanisms of how to move a difficult conversation to a learning conversation, how to look at the other person's point of view, all kinds of good nuggets in there. You can't teach yourself how to communicate better. Nobody is born a good communicator. You may be born with the gift of the gab. You may be, a very extroverted person, but it doesn't mean an introvert does not know how to communicate, right? It's like riding a bicycle, learning to use a computer. There are certain tips, certain skills you can apply. It calls, just like riding a bicycle or using a computer, it calls to practice, practice, practice. Okay? Now, very timely, just when the bank asked me to do this presentation, I received, I get all these newsletters and so from all kind of family business forums. I got one by Dennis Jaffe. He's a famed family business author, and he says 60 seconds on conflict. And in it, he lists 9 tips of how to deal with conflict. Again, conflict management, and I think you have a session, one of the breakout sessions, that's a whole half day, that's a whole lifetime of learning, right, how to deal with conflict. But I thought that some of his bullet points were pretty telling, and it is something to give you food for thought. First of all, you need to know what it is you want. Listen, everything has to start with you. What are your intentions, right? And what is you really want this person to do? What do you want for the relationship? And is that realistic? Is it fair? Is it something that could happen? Don't look to get blood from a stone, right? What will happen if you do not change anything, if nothing changes? I would say, well, what's the worst case scenario here? If we leave it as it is, because in a difficult conversation, you have to assess, is it worth having this conversation? Okay? And the best way to do it is, if I do not have the conversation, if I do not address this, if we do not move this relationship forward, or attend to this presented problem, what is the downside? In your own heads, you have to define whether this is a business issue, a financial issue, a family component. What is this really? Because there are things that belong in the realm of the family that have nothing to do with the business, and vice versa. And sometimes they are linked. Now, when you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody to try and work towards the beginning of conflict resolution, please don't do it as a by the way, or don't do it at Sunday lunch. You pull them aside. It doesn't work like that. You have to arrange a time when it is safe. You do not expect to have interruptions, and you say, "Listen, I want to talk to you about this particular situation. I see it this way, and you see it that way, and I want you to help me understand how come that you see it this way." And we could agree, look, let's just talk to understand each other. We can agree not to make any decisions, or we can agree we want to make a resolution, depending on the nature of the conflict. Okay? But the whole idea is how you pitch it to the person. And what you started with is a mutual purpose, right? Both of us want this business to succeed. Both of us want you to do well, right? Both of us want continuity. And I feel we should paint the room pink, because I find pink really is a color that puts people in a good, soothing mood, and they work harder. And you want the room painted red because you find it gets more energy going, right? So we see it differently. Let's talk about why we see it differently, how we see it differently. And a lot of this is language, folks. Help me to understand. Tell me more. Then here comes one of the hardest things a business owner could ever do, because especially their senior generation, they're used to giving orders. They're used to telling you as it is, or just go do it, right? So listening to the other person without interrupting, asking questions to make sure you understand them. This is the hardest thing. My own brother, he's in his 70s, and he gets very impatient because he's had all these years of experience. He feels he knows what he's talking about, and he does. He does know what he's talking about, but you're dealing with people half his age who have not had his exposure, not had his experience, and they may have different views. So the idea of getting him to shut up sometimes and listen to them, really listen, is an issue. Number 6, separate your interests from what you want. Sometimes you just come with, this is my position, without saying, what I'm trying to achieve here. So the idea about separating your interests is say what you're trying to achieve. Take a step back. Go back to what we call first principles. What are you trying to achieve? Because maybe if both of you agree on what you're trying to achieve, it just becomes a question of tactics then. How do we achieve this? Or if you have you're trying to achieve something different than the other person, maybe you could then say, well, what really will serve the business well? Whose level of interest will really serve the business and the family going forward well at this point? If it gets hot and emotional, which it will, take a pause, take a deep breath, and think of what's happening within you. I mean, I once dealt with a family, 2 sons, and one of them was really a volatile kid. And the father called me up one day. He said, listen, the next time he walks out of a meeting with me and his brother in his office or whatever, I'm going to tell him, keep walking, walk off the compound and never come back. I was like, oh my gosh. I said, you know what? Let's institute some timeouts in a meeting sometimes, If it's really very, really overwhelmed, just ask for a timeout, take 3 minutes, go to the bathroom, wash your face, take a few breaths, and come back in. Now, you can't abuse it. It's not a football game where you're taking a timeout every minute or whatever. But it is a way of bringing the temperature down. Because once it gets into this hot and emotional and shouted match, nobody is going to get hurt. Nobody's not going anywhere. If you reach an impasse, get a trusted person that you both could trust to come in and give a point of view. And that's where you have external board members comes in very, very valuable. They're very good at, if they're a good board member, at mediating this kind of thing. They also are very good at mentoring the next generation. And please, one conversation is not going to undo years of differences and not addressing something. You don't think it's going to happen overnight, resolving this conflict. All right, that's my little spiel on communication. How am I doing for time, folks? I forgot to look at my watch because I kept thinking I started at 9, but obviously we didn't. I guess I have at least about 5 more minutes. Can anybody tell me?
Yes, just about 5 to 7.
5 to 7. Oh, I'm doing better than I thought. Okay. Now, I know this setup, and I didn't know what your breakout sessions were until today. So it is very fortuitous that I came up with some of these things. But this is what people think about when they think family business advising. They think succession planning, right? Yes, succession planning along all levels of your business are important, right? Every job you should be thinking, this is a key position. How will I, if something happens to this person, or as I tell people, if you win the lotto tomorrow morning and you decide never to come to work again, what is my plan for making sure my business continues? Now, succession planning in family business is a two-headed event, right? And what happens in family businesses, we collapse the two together. It is ownership succession, which is what we call complete and irrevocable. Once you sign on that dotted line and you hand over those shares, whether you do it when you're alive, which is a different discussion, or whether it's done via your will, that is done. You can't take back the shares. It's a one-time event. Leadership succession has to be staged. It takes time to train somebody, especially for senior positions in the business. As we were just talking about, as I tell you kids, I read for 10 years. Old man's briefcase for 10 years. Now, ownership succession also brings some questions that keep senior generation awake at night. Is equal always fair, and does fair mean equal? My wife and I, we own 100% of this business. We have 4 children. 3 are working in the business. 1 is not. Do I give everybody equal shares? Do I not? 1 has worked with me for 40 years. The other one just came in. Do I give the one who worked longer more shares? What is fair and what is equal? And is equal always fair? And how do I deal with the question of people who do not work in the business? The terminology is active shareholders are those who work in the business, passive shareholders are those who do not. There used to be a mechanism where they would give, and so I see somebody still using it, and this is the Toyota thing, where Toyota has, I forget what, they had minority shares, like 30% or whatever, but they had the deciding votes. So some people kind of put things in place where the CEO cannot be vetoed by other family members. So you may have a certain class of shares, voted shares versus non-voted shares. The lawyer, well, people are moving away from that now because there's a lot of talk in the literature and everywhere else about how could this be fair and how could this be right. Anyway, these are so many mechanisms. Then how do I balance the books? If I have active shareholders or passive shareholders, a lot of people say, you know what? I'm going to leave the business to the active shareholders. And I am going to leave the house to the passive shareholder or some real estate investment or whatever, or money in the bank if you're fortunate enough to have that at some point. You know what? Nobody's ever happy. The people who work in the business say to me, but this is a business, it's volatile, anything could happen. Right now we're making money, but there's no guarantee we'll continue. The environment could change, government could change their policies, whatever. And the people who get the real estate or some other wealth say, this is a one-time thing. These people here have a cash cow that will go on forever and ever. So it's not very easy to make that distinction. And finally, do I wait until I die to pass the shares? And it's, my own father in our family business handed over when my brothers were very young, right? There are pros and cons. I think that it was a good thing. It helped my brothers to really grow the business and have a great sense of ownership. Because you also have businesses with 50-year-old men and women wanting to do something within the business, working within the business 30 years and have to go to die. I don't know if any of you are young, old enough to remember when we used to have to go and say, permission, please. We in school and we had to go to the bathroom. Miss, permission, please, to go to the bathroom. So 40-year-old and 50-year-old men going to father, permission, please, to do this or that. Right? Whereas if you want people to act as owners, give them a stake, their family members. But that's my own pet peeve. And again, it's coming out of my own experience. So the thing about succession or succession planning, it is not an overnight thing, right? Unless the unthinkable happens, and it does. Somebody gets diagnosed with cancer and don't even last 3 months. Somebody driving his car too fast and wrecks, and immediately there's a void, right? Succession is a marathon, it is not a sprint. So if you are fortunate enough to be in a position to begin planning for your succession, whether it's ownership and or leadership, you need to put things in place that it will take some time for this to be achieved. And there's a whole lot of mechanisms of succession planning. And what does the business need? How do I train the successor? What do you think the person has to do? How do I get everybody in the family to accept that this is the person who is the successor? All of these are the kinds of issues that you have to work through. You also have to commit if you're the family owner, business owner, of leaving at a certain time. You know, at what age will I really hand over? And you got to make it public and stick with it, you know. But they keep pushing that date back all the time. Or what, how do we carve out a role for the senior generation member in the business while allowing the successor to take the helm? What kind of role do we do? He can become an ambassador for the business. A lot of times what they do is they make him chairman of the board. But does that mean that he's an executive chairman? Will the staff still go to him for decisions? There's a lot to work out when you're working through a succession. And remember, it is not about passing on money alone, the ownership and this cash cow or whatever. It is about duties, responsibilities, and values. So this is why succession is a marathon and not a sprint. And that is why I talk about things like tacit knowledge, because there's so much you need to pass on. Okay, thank you for your kind attention.